you. Thank you for all being here. It's amazing to see so many. So today we are really lucky to welcome Diane Danzebrink to talk about menopause and understanding menopause, as well as Jen Lewis, who will talk to us all about vaginal dryness and her own journeys through menopause. My name is Aline Boblin. I would consider I'm a survivor of my menopause journey. This time last year I would never have been able to do what we're doing today. And that's thanks to my own research, thanks to women who organise other groups like Leslie on Facebook for us to talk. Some of you might be from Is It Hot in Here on Facebook, I don't know. Yes, lovely to meet you. And these kind of events are here to raise that awareness and make sure we can go through the change, as they call it, in an empowered fashion, understanding our options and the long-term impacts of menopause. So here we are. I'm going to hand over to Diane in a couple of minutes. On this note, no further ado, over to you.
Thank you, lovely. Morning, everybody. Morning. Congratulations to the amazing people that have come from Somerset. Come on. So, lovely people. I will get out of the way of this in a minute, I promise. So, it's lovely to see you all. What we're going to try and do today over the next hour and 45-ish minutes is to essentially give you as much information about menopause as possible, but also at the end to answer your questions. I'll talk for a little bit, and then Jane's going to take over, talk about all things vagina, urinary, etc., etc., and then we'll do questions at the end. So, before we go any further, a little bit of an introduction to me for those of you who have not come across me on social media, etc. My name's Diane Danzebrink. The reason I'm standing here really is because I had a bloody awful menopause. I had to have I'm in surgical menopause, so I had to have a total hysterectomy at the age of 45, and that was for complex reasons that we haven't got time to go into. But unfortunately, before my surgery, I didn't get the right advice and support about what surgical menopause actually entails. And sadly, post-surgery, I didn't get that either. And long story short, my menopause symptoms were not really hot flushes and night sweats. My menopause symptoms were very much cognitive and psychological, to the point where I essentially thought that my life was useless, hopeless and worthless. And I got very close, as I'm sure some of you know, to taking my own life. And at the point when that happened, thankfully, I had somebody to pick me up, take me to the doctors, put me down in front of her, and insist that she helped me. I was very lucky because I got sat down in front of a doctor who did understand menopause. And a couple of weeks after I'd slapped my first patch on my thigh, I started to feel a little bit better. And I thought, okay, so that nearly happened to me. I'm delighted to have found some support at last, but what about those people that aren't in the position that I was in? What about the people who they don't have somebody to pick them up? Or maybe that somebody doesn't know what to do? What about all the women that have gone before who didn't get the right advice and support? So it made me start to research. And if you ask my husband, he will tell you that I'm a terrible researcher, because once I get my head into something, you'll never get an answer out of me, because I'm very focused. And I started to find this kind of underground world, mainly of women, saying things like, please help me, I think I'm going mad. I don't know who I am anymore. I feel so alone. Nobody understands. I feel like I can't do my job anymore, etc., etc., etc. And I thought, hang on a minute. By this time, it was sort of late 2012. And I thought to myself, hang on a minute. So we're 51% of the population. It's going to happen to every woman. How are we still in a situation where we have women resorting to social media to try and find somebody to help them? This is just ridiculous. And it was sort of one of those moments when you think, do you know what, somebody should really do something about this. and then you turned around one day and you recognised that somebody is you. And I thought, do you know what? When I feel better, I just won't allow this to continue. And so it did take me about 2 years to really feel back to me. And I decided to set up something called Menopause Support. So Menopause Support is very much about factual, evidence-based information, education, advice and support. As part of Menopause Support, I set up something called the Menopause Support Network. It's a group on Facebook. We have around 11,500 members now. But that kind of wasn't enough, because that, you know, you're helping 11,500 women, or in my day-to-day life, I go into businesses and organisations and I do menopause education and awareness, or I'll work individually with women, menopause counselling with them. But, you know, you're really scratching the tip of the iceberg. And so I decided in October 2018 that I would set up something called the Make Menopause Matter campaign. And it was just one of those moments when I was sitting in front of my computer and I took no advice from anybody. I just sat there and thought, essentially, sod it, we need to do something. And so I just sat there, typed out the campaign, decided what the 3 main aims were, and away we went with absolutely, you know, kind of no funding, nothing. We just cracked on. And with the help of lots of people, and I'm sure lots of you in this room have probably shared it, we're about just over a year down the road, and we've now got 92,000 signatures on that petition. The 3 aims were to have, or are, 2 of them are, one of them was. The first one is to have mandatory menopause education for all general practitioners, because despite the fact that we're 51% of the population and every woman will go through it, our GPs are still not given mandatory training in menopause. The second one is to have guidance in every workplace, because currently we just have far too many women who are A, not being supported, and B, we actually have quite a big proportion of women who are leaving the workplace due to their menopause symptoms. And the third one was to have menopause included in the new RSE curriculum alongside periods and pregnancy. And I'm delighted to say that we actually achieved that in July this year, which in terms of campaigning, when I first set it up, somebody said to me, don't expect to achieve anything for 5 years. You know, campaigning is a long haul, and so 9 months is really pretty quick. So it makes me, you know, kind of quite hopeful for the future that we will get to where we want to be with, which is great. So that's kind of what's got me standing here. Professionally, I'm a psychotherapist. I work mainly now in the area of women's mental health, menopause, Pmdd, etc., etc. Is everybody familiar with Pmdd? No? Okay. So Pmdd is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Essentially, if anyone's ever experienced PMS or PMT, then PMS and PMT times it by about 1,000. So essentially, it's kind of PMT on speed. And for those women who experience it, and actually it's about 1 in 20 of the female population, if you have somebody in your life that says to you, I have about 2 good weeks of the month and the other 2 weeks are horrendous, and if you have somebody that says to you, do you know what, I feel absolutely horrendous coming up to my period, but once I bleed it's a huge relief, you're probably talking to somebody with PMDD. And of course, PMDD is often referred to as a hormone imbalance, which is absolutely incorrect. PMDD is essentially a sensitivity to your own hormone changes. So it depends how sensitive you are to your own hormone changes. But for those women who experience it, on average, it's similar to those women who have trouble getting diagnosed with endometriosis. It takes around 7 or 8 years for those women to be diagnosed with PMDD. And for those who are very severely affected, it can cause manic episodes. So, you know, sort of it really is important that, you know, kind of we really do challenge things around women's health. And it might not be for us. because by the time we've achieved what we want to achieve, then actually it might be for those of you who have daughters or nieces, etc., it might be for them. But it really is important that we are the generation that make a difference. So, as I said, I work part of the time as a menopause counsellor, part of the time as a wellbeing consultant going into organisations. I have professional nurse training in menopause, and I'm a member of all different sorts of societies around this. When you are as outspoken as I am about what needs to change, TV and radio tend to want to speak to you. And so for anybody who I have made cough up their cornflakes on breakfast over their breakfast in the morning, I apologise, because it is generally breakfast TV where I tend to pop up. Some of you may have seen this morning, yesterday. So the Make Menopause Matter campaign, that's what it looks like. That's the hashtag you're looking for. I would love you all very deeply, if you haven't already looked at it and considered signing and sharing it, if you might do that with your friends, with your colleagues, with your family, because menopause might affect 51% of the population directly, but indirectly it affects us all. So, let's look at why it matters. So, as I've already said several times, we are 51% of the population, and that counts. Every woman's experience of menopause is different. We will have 1 in 4 women will have almost no symptoms at all. 1 in 4 will have what they describe as debilitating symptoms, severely affecting their quality of life. The ONS tells us that actually we're all going to live much, much longer, which is great. It's great to be living long lives, but the thing is, we want to be able to live long, happy, healthy lives. That's the most important thing. And without having the right factual, evidenced information, it's difficult to be able to do that, because we need to make decisions for ourselves, probably now, to enable ourselves to have those long, healthy lives. In the workplace, we've currently got around 4.4 million women in the workplace over the age of 50. It's the fastest growing demographic, so consequently we're going to see menopause in the workplace being something that needs to be supported more and more regularly as time goes on. You probably can't see that brilliantly, but the British Menopause Society do a survey every couple of years. This is the most recent one. And in that survey, it said that for 45% of the women they surveyed, work can be a struggle, so their symptoms can have an impact. 33% said that it affected their social lives, because essentially they were putting so much into their work day that they had nothing left for social activity. 51% said it massively impacted their most intimate relationships, and sex was absolutely a no-go area. And interestingly, this is the first time that they'd surveyed partners, and 38% of partners said, we haven't got a clue, we don't know what to do, don't know what to help, don't even know what it is. And why would they? Because none of us get educated about it, which is why having it included in the national curriculum is so important. So what is menopause? Because we use this word to kind of cover the whole transition, and actually it breaks down into 3. So, first of all, why does menopause occur? So menopause, in a natural menopause, it's occurring because essentially whatever the amount of oocytes we're born with, so the eggs in our ovaries, they're running out. And eventually they will get to a point where there won't be any more. And that will be a phase that we call post-menopause. But way before that, we have perimenopause. And perimenopause is essentially the time from your first symptom until the time you've had 12 months without a period. And generally the menopause transition, and it is a huge generalisation, but generally the menopause transition is between 4 and 8 years. So from first symptom to being totally asymptomatic is between 4 and 8 years. For somebody like me, who's in surgical menopause, my menopause will go on forever, because I don't have any ovaries at all. So I go into menopause immediately at the cut of the surgeon's knife, and I will always be postmenopausal, essentially. So, Perimenopause. The interesting thing about perimenopause is if you sort of went out into the street and surveyed people and said, what's menopause? They'd probably say hot flushes and night sweats. And that's true for some, although it's interesting to know that not all women will have hot flushes and night sweats, even if they're having symptoms. So with perimenopause, the first symptoms for the majority tend to be cognitive and psychological. They tend to be things like brain fog, loss of concentration, reduced memory, anxiety, low mood, etc., etc. But of course the thing is with that is unless you know they can be perimenopause symptoms, you're probably thinking, what the hell is wrong with me? Why can't I remember such and such? Why do I feel so flat when actually there's nothing wrong in my life? My job's okay, my relationship's okay, my family's okay, etc., etc. And the difficulty with that is that what happens is a lot of women then go along to their doctor and they'll say all the things I've just said. And the doctor will then say, well, clearly you're anxious and you're depressed, you need antidepressants. And so for those of you who've heard of Dr. Louise Newton, Louise recently did a survey of 3,000 women, and in that survey, just under 60% of them had been offered antidepressants for their perimenopausal symptoms. So it is really, really common, and it's one of the reasons why we need to share this information so widely, so that because what we've got at the moment is we've got this massive information void. We've got women who don't know what perimenopausal symptoms can be, and we've got doctors who don't recognise them. And when I say doctors who don't recognise them, of course, we do have a proportion of doctors who have gone on to study menopause specifically, but it's not in the general GP population. So, consequently, a lot of people fall through the gap of being diagnosed with perimenopause. So, as I said, first symptom to 12 months and without a period. Menopause, clinically, and for those of you who are going through it, I already apologise for whoever wrote the book, but menopause clinically is 1 day. It's the one day, yes, laugh, because it's funny. I don't know who wrote that. I could guess it's not a woman. It's the 1 day after you've had a full 12 months without a period. So an unbroken 12 months without a period. And then postmenopause is everything afterwards. So again, the myth around postmenopause is it means no symptoms. Unfortunately, for a small proportion of women, postmenopause will still mean that they're symptomatic. So when does it happen? So again, these are big generalisations, but generally it's between the ages of 51 and 52 when you have that 1 day where you've had 12 months without a period. Generally, generalising, between the ages of 45 and 55, most people will stop their periods completely. It can happen later, so I've got 2 clients at the moment. I've got one of 56 and one of 57 who are still having regular monthly periods. It's quite unusual, but it does happen. But more importantly, it can happen earlier. And it's really important that we recognise it can happen earlier. Because similarly to endometriosis, PMDD, PCOS, I could list a lot of other conditions, premature ovarian insufficiency is poorly diagnosed. So essentially, premature ovarian insufficiency means that the woman's ovaries have stopped working for one reason or another before she's 40. So we currently have 1 in 100 women under 1 in 100 women under 40, 1 in 1,000 under 30, and 1 in 10,000 under 20 in the UK who are in premature menopause. So around 110,000 in the UK population. But 1 in 100 under 40 is not that rare. And if any of you work in big organisations where there are a lot of women, it's quite likely you work with one of those women. So, it is important that we know about this, because not just so that those women can receive the right support, both clinically, but also if they're in the workplace, but also there are implications for early menopause when you're talking about looking at long-term health. Other reasons why it might happen early. So as I said, sort of for me, I had what's called a total hysterectomy. So for me, that was both my ovaries, my womb and my cervix. A hysterectomy, so just having your womb removed, that can actually lead to you having an earlier menopause than you may have done. That's certainly not for everybody, but for a small proportion, that can happen too, because obviously the blood flow to the ovaries is disrupted when the surgery is done. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So if you're going through any kind of cancer treatment and you're having chemotherapy, then there are certain types of chemotherapy that can induce an early menopause. Radiotherapy to the pelvic area, which obviously is pretty much right over the womb and the ovaries, that can also induce an early menopause. It's worth knowing if your family line have always been early menopause. So I have several clients who happen to know that their mothers, their grandmothers, their aunts, if they have older sisters, have all gone into an early menopause, because that can be a pattern that follows on. It's also important to say that if your mother, sister, grandmother had a particularly bad menopause, it doesn't mean that yours is going to follow to be the same. So I thought what we'd do is look at each of the hormones that are at play here and look at the jobs that they do, because when we look at symptoms, it'll sort of make more sense. So with estrogen, we know that generally throughout a woman's life, estrogen is helping to regulate the menstrual cycle. But as you can see from that slide, it also does a huge amount of jobs. So it helps to, essentially, it's a nourisher for the body and it's a lubricant for the body. So if we were to stand one of you up and light you up, you would light up like a Christmas tree, because you've got estrogen receptors literally from your head to your toes. Estrogen helps to lubricate your eyes, your mouth, your gut, your entire pelvic area, your joints. Estrogen helps to control your cholesterol levels. Estrogen helps to protect your heart. Estrogen helps to protect your bones. We're finding out more and more about estrogen and its long-term effects on your brain. So there are a huge amount of jobs that this hormone is doing. Progesterone. So progesterone, again, it's about regulating monthly cycle. It's about maintaining a pregnancy. And for some women, and it's certainly not fair to say all, but for some women, estrogen can act as a calmer on the brain. And when I show you the slide of how the hormones change, it will make sense to you. As I said, some women are more sensitive to the hormone changes in their body every month than others, so it's not true to say that for everybody. But for some women, estrogen acts as a calmer. And it also helps to promote good sleep. So one of the first things that women tend to say to me is, I don't know what's happened to my sleep. I'm awake at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. I'm on my iPad, which is the worst thing to do, but I totally empathise with it because I used to do it too. So estrogen certainly helps with our sleep. So once it starts to fall, for a lot of people, it's the first thing that happens. Then, of course, you're not sleeping properly, so you're tired, you're fatigued. I will speak personally, I'm irritable, etc., etc. If you've got to go and do a day at work, and it's something where maybe you're having to either interact with people. So I've worked with quite a lot of nurses, police officers, teachers who are all responsible for other people. And that brings a huge amount of anxiety to them, because if they're not 100% on their game, they worry that they're not doing the right thing. If you're somebody who has to focus on a computer for 8 hours a day, that can also, oh my goodness me, that's so hot. That's that. Yeah, we'll maybe change that. You can see that it's quite complex. It's not as simple as hot flashes and night sweats. And then testosterone, which interestingly is pretty much, certainly in the press, I even saw an article that was written recently, literally 2 weeks ago, the male hormone. No, it's not. It's a hormone that men have, but it's a hormone that women have too. And actually, there are times in our lives when we produce quite a lot of it. So, testosterone's always spoken about with regards to libido. Always, always. But again, it's much more complex than that. It's also about what somebody described to me the other day as their joie de vivre, their joy for life, about how they feel about themselves. It's also about your cognitive function, how sharp you feel. There are also physical things that it does too, to do with your bone health and your muscle health. So again, really key, if you've got a woman who's gone into very early menopause or a woman who's gone into surgical menopause, those women really need the right advice about the complexity of replacing hormones. So I said I'd show you a slide. So the purple line represents progesterone, the red line represents estrogen. So as you can see, for those women where progesterone acts as a calmer, when it falls off a cliff quite hard and quite fast, you can see why people start to feel anxious out of nowhere. They don't really understand. Can you see round there, lovely? Are you sure? Because I'm really worried about you straining your neck. You sure? Okay. Alrighty. So progesterone's falling off a cliff, and then estrogen, bless it, starts to peak and dip on a daily basis. And it's true to say a daily basis, but it's also true to say sometimes an hourly basis. So depending on what sort of menopause you're having, so, sort of that's probably representative of somebody who's having quite severe symptoms, because the peaks and troughs are quite high and deep. But the estrogen starts to peak and dip, and so if you've ever woken up and said, oh, I don't know why I feel so much worse than I did yesterday, there's absolutely no reason for it, it's probably your lovely estrogen level that's responsible for that. Symptoms. So, as I said, there are certainly more than two. If you Google this, and I strongly urge you not to, because there are all sorts of lists popping up online with all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And, sort of as with everything that comes online, I always think, view it with a healthy dose of scepticism. Do your research. But there are pretty much accepted to be, sort of around 35 menopause symptoms. So hot flashes and night sweats, as I said, they're the ones that are spoken about the most. Not every woman will have them. Yes, periods, for those people going through a natural menopause, periods will fluctuate, they will eventually stop. It's also true to say that they won't just get lighter and more infrequent. Actually, for a lot of women, they get heavier. Things like mood swings, anxiety, low mood, what you might describe as feeling depressed, can all be part of that. As I said, sleep can be part of that. The cognitive things, the memory lapses, etc., the difficulty concentrating. Some of the ones that you might not have come across are things like dizziness and lightheadedness. That can also be there. Weight gain. So a lot of people say, oh, what the hell is happening? I've always been a size 10. What's going on all of a sudden? When your hormones start to change, it changes the way that we store fat in our bodies, etc. And that's why, I never had this. And I eat a really good diet and I exercise quite regularly. Do you think I can get rid of it? No, absolutely not. But other things, as I said, it helps with the digestion too. So estrogen lubricates the digestive tract. So some people will say things like bloating, or they'll have what they sort of consider to be irritable bowel symptoms. So I can't tell you the amount of people that I have worked with who come along and A, they've got antidepressants, B, they say things like, I've been diagnosed with IBS. The other one that's really common is I've been diagnosed with CFS. So CFS is chronic fatigue syndrome, so it's the newer term for ME. Actually, generally, it's to do with perimenopause. People who come along and say, I've been referred to the cardiologist because I've got palpitations. palpitations is a really, really common symptom of menopause. People that have been referred on to rheumatology because they've got aching joints, again, a really common symptom. I'll be really honest with you and say that the one that bothers me the most deeply is women who come and tell me that they've been referred to psychiatry. There might be the occasional person, but if you've had no previous history of mental health issues and suddenly you're in your mid-40s and you're really struggling, then, we should be looking at what's going on underlying here. So, other things, changes to hair. Hair can start to feel drier, start to feel thinner. Nails can actually not start to feel quite as healthy as they had. As I said, we would really light up. There are estrogen receptors everywhere. Increased headaches. So for some women, when their hormone levels start to change, they'll have more headaches. Sort of things like dry mouth and burning tongue. A lot of people struggle with dry mouth. As I said, again, estrogen helps with the lubrication. Lots of people end up going to the opticians lots of times because they're struggling with very dry eyes, getting lots of different expensive drops. Again, sort of if you're in that perimenopausal phase. Itchy skin, really dry, itchy skin. I'll say it really carefully. Clinically, really dry, itchy skin is called formication. Not to be confused, particularly during perimenopause. Tingling, some people will struggle with tingling, etc. So if we look at the list of symptoms, essentially the important thing to remember is there's no one size fits all. You might have somebody where their only symptoms are hot flushes and anxiety. You might have somebody else where their only symptoms are achy joints and digestive issues, etc. It doesn't necessarily follow a pattern. But if menopause was or is a taboo subject, and hopefully I want to come to a time where we stop saying that, because we are definitely talking about it more. But if that was taboo, then things like the pelvic issues, things like vaginal dryness, soreness, irritation, the repeated urinary tract infections, well, that's kind of a double taboo, because nobody wants to talk about that, except my lovely friend, who is going to come and talk to you about it now.